What's the real cost of silence? Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that hides deep wounds and painful truths, and slowly destroys families. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that's way beyond the pages of the holy books. A story about a man who thought he was close to God, but failed to be a father. Imagine a young, innocent princess walking through the palace halls. Her footsteps echo as she goes to her stepbro's room, carrying only kindness and goodness. She has no idea what's about to happen. It's a nightmare that will change her life. The most shocking thing is the silence of the one who should be protecting her. To understand the full scale of this tragedy, we have to go back to Jerusalem, years before Christ was born. On the highest point of the city, there's a royal palace. Palace of David, where David, the king of Israel, lived, a man who conquered kingdoms and wrote psalms that still touch people's hearts. But this isn't about his battles, it's about his life after a big setback as a father. After the loss, David built a mighty empire. His military conquests pushed the borders of Israel further than ever before. His kingdom flourished, and his name became synonymous with wisdom and fairness. But inside the palace, there was a complex dynamic between his wives and concubines. David had a huge family with kids from different moms, which was normal for kings back then. But it created tension between the kids. There was Amnon, the heir apparent, and Absalom, who was known for his height, charm, and sister Tamar. She was a young princess, whose life was about to be messed up by a chain of events. So, the thing is, my dad could have prevented it. That makes this story extra relevant to us today, because it's not just about the crazy stuff that happened, but also about the eternal lessons about family leadership. When we look at the events leading up to the tragedy of Amari's family, we see patterns of behavior and warning signs that keep happening in modern families. A leader might be great at managing a state, but they can also be blind to what's going on in their own home. How can a dad who's known for being sensitive about writing songs suddenly shut down when his daughter's in pain? And most importantly, what can we learn from these mistakes to protect our families? Let's look at not only what led to the breakup of Amari's world, but also 3 important things every parent should know to avoid similar tragedies. Even though times have changed, the dynamics of families haven't. They can lead to disaster, but they're still frighteningly similar. This is a story about betrayal and consequences. Above all, it's a warning that silence from those who should be protecting can be more damaging than an attack of violence, like in the second book of Kings, chapter 8. David's rise to the throne was marked not just by military victories, but also by his family growing in Hebron. He had 6 sons with different women, Anon with Ahinoam, Quip with Ajasam, Adonijah with Adon, Kos with Abode, and It with Needles. Later, in Jerusalem, his family kept growing. The atmosphere in the palace reflected this complexity. Imagine those huge stone halls, where brothers and stepbrothers and sisters grew up, each carrying the burden of being a royal son, as well as their mother's expectations and ambitions. The scriptures in the second book of Kings show us that in chapter 13, there was. In the middle of all this, there was Absalom and his beautiful sister, Tamar. Amnon, another son of David, fell in love with her. Before the tragedy happened, life in the palace was pretty normal. David split his time between running the kingdom and taking care of his family. He was a man who almost achieved everything he wanted. His kingdom stretched from Dan to Beersheba. But behind the scenes, things were starting to get a bit complicated. There were signs of trouble. Families with so many kids from different mothers couldn't help but get into rivalries and jealousies. Each prince had his own group of supporters, and Amnon, as the oldest, had a special place in the family. Absalom, on the other hand, had already started to feel left out. He wanted more attention from his father. And then came the tragedy that changed everything. Tamar, a young woman, lived among the virgins in the royal household. She was protected and accepted because of her charisma and ambition. She had a strong sense of justice and was respected by everyone. In the second book of Kings, chapter 13, verse 10, we meet David, Nadav's nephew and Anon's friend. He was described as a clever man, and his presence at court would turn the already tense situation into a tragedy. It's tragic how people can exploit family structures when they're vulnerable. The isolation of children, lack of parental supervision, and the presence of questionable advisors all contributed to the tragedy. As Proverbs 2 verse 3 says, "For a man's ways seem right to him, but God judges his heart." Reasonable people see evil and try to hide, but the simple ones just pass by and get punished. David was busy with the affairs of the kingdom, maybe a bit too confident in the harmony of his home, and didn't notice how the relationship between his sons was getting worse. This man, who had the wisdom to solve the toughest issues in the kingdom, had a problem right under his own roof. The scriptures say in Deuteronomy that parents should teach their kids well, talking about it when they're sitting at home, walking on the road, lying down, and getting up. But in the middle of all the responsibilities of the kingdom and his own family, David seemed to forget this basic responsibility. And everything was set up for a tragedy that would ruin the life of a young girl and shake the whole kingdom. With a seemingly simple, greedy gaze and malicious advice, the narrative takes a dark turn. In the second book of Kings, chapter 13, verse 2, the scriptures reveal that Amnon was so upset about his sister, Tamar, that he fell ill. It was not brotherly love that consumed him, but an unhealthy obsession. As the king's firstborn, Amnon had always gotten what he wanted, but this time, things were different. The guy was totally messed up because his stepsister was off limits. It got even worse when this guy, Nadav, came on the scene. He was a real slick dude. When he saw his buddy losing weight, he asked him why. He said, "Why are you, the king's son, losing all this weight every day? Won't you tell me?" That innocent-looking guy opened the door to one of the craziest schemes in the Bible. You see, manipulative people can make difficult situations seem impossible to change. Instead of telling Amona to stop having impure thoughts, she came up with a diabolical plan. She suggested that he lie on his bed and pretend to be sick when his dad came to visit. Then, when his dad asked for a favor, he'd say he wanted his sister Tamar to bring him something to eat. The plan was simple, but it was also cruel, taking advantage of customs from the past. It was pretty common for women in the family to look after the sick, and Nadab had set up the perfect trap. He knew that neither David nor Thomas would suspect any malicious intent behind the seemingly innocent request from a sick brother. The execution of the plan showed how much the sister had corrupted and taken advantage of the family's trust. In 2 Kings 13 and 6, the Holy Scriptures showed how he faked his illness and called Amnon over, pretending to be sick. When the king came, Amnon asked the king for something simple: 2 pies from his sister, Tamar. It sounded innocent enough to David. After all, who would think evil of a brother wanting to be cared for by his sister? But that's where things took a dark turn. It was one of the most heartbreaking parts of the story, seeing how a father's innocent actions could inadvertently put his children in danger. The book of Proverbs, chapter 27, warns us that reasonable people can see evil and prevent it. Anan was obsessed with Ian Dove's advice, which was suspicious and specific. Anan had a plan that wasn't just about satisfying a forbidden desire, it was also about controlling power and perverting family ties. He used his position to carry out his dark intentions when innocent Tamar went to bed, thinking she was going to take care of her brother. No one could have predicted what horror was to come. As it's written in Ecclesiastes, bitter deaths are the fate of a wife whose heart is netted and her hands are shackled. Whoever is good before God will escape, but the sinner will be caught. This is exactly what happened to Tamar. When she came to rest, she discovered that her brother was clearly ill. She cooked food for him, showing all the love and care a sister could have, but then the mask fell off when she went to eat with him. He took it off and said, "Come lie down with me, sister." At that terrible moment, Tamar realized she had fallen into a trap. His immediate response revealed not only his character, but also his knowledge of the law. There was no way out of the dangerous situation. She begged him not to do such a stupid thing. She tried to reason with him, appealing to morality, but he didn't listen. Overcome by his obsession with her, Amnon was stronger than she was. The violence of the act was further intensified by what happened next. The scriptures show that after the attack, Amnon's supposed love turned into hatred. He hated Tamar with such great intensity that the hatred he had for her was stronger than the love he felt for her. In the last act, Amnon banished her, adding public humiliation to the already committed violence. Devastated, Tamar covered her head in ashes and tore off the colorful garment she was wearing. She put her hands over her head and walked away, crying out in pain. His actions when he covered himself in ashes were a public display of mourning and tragedy, reflecting the culture of the time. And now we come to the moment that gives this story its name, the silence of David. When this news reached his ears, the Holy Scriptures say that King David's anger flared strongly. But what follows is even more revealing. Silence, no action, no justice for his daughter who had been raped. Some scholars speculate that David may have felt guilty about his past actions, remembering his sin with Bathsheba. Others say he was caught between being a king and a father, but no matter what, the outcome was devastating. The daughter was devastated, the criminal went unpunished, and the seeds were sown in Avisa's heart. Amari was silent, and David's message carries through the ages as a warning for all parents. When those with power and responsibility decide not to act against injustice, it can be destructive and have far-reaching consequences. Tamar ended up living alone in Absalom's house. Brother, in just 13 minutes, her life that was once full of hope and opportunities was reduced to isolation and trauma. The palace, which was supposed to be a refuge, started to become a nightmare scenario, where what was supposed to protect her became an accomplice in her silence. This silence not only failed to bring justice to Amari, but it also sowed the seeds for a bigger tragedy. As it's written in Ecclesiastes 8 verse 11, when evil deeds go unpunished, people's hearts become more inclined to evil. Silence has a price, and in David's case, there will be a cost to pay. In the second book of Kings, chapter 1, verse 22, Avisom didn't speak because Absalom was upset with him for forcing his sister Tamar. This silence, unlike David's, was a strategic silence before the storm, lasting for 2 years. Avisom was harboring hatred day after day. The scripture shows that he carefully planned his revenge, waiting for the perfect moment. 2 full years later, according to Samuel chapter 23 verse 2, Absalom finally put his plan into action. His plan was as insidious as Amnon's, but he organized a sheep-shearing festival as a way to carry out his plan. This was traditionally a big event with lots of feasting, as recorded in 2 Kings 1 verse 24. He invited all the king's sons, even though he knew David probably wouldn't come. When David hesitated about allowing Amnon to attend, Abisham insisted that if there was no other brother, then he should at least let Amnon go. According to 1 Kings 1 verse 26, the pro was clearly innocent, but it resulted in a death sentence during the festival. When Absalom gave the order to his servants, it was clear: strike Amnon and kill him. Don't be afraid. The moment came, and the execution was quick and brutal. The rest of the king's sons, fearing for their lives, mounted their mules and fled. The news that reached David first was even worse than reality. Absalom had struck all the king's sons, and none of them were left. At this point, we see how quickly bad news spreads, but not always accurately. Nadab, who had been involved in the plan, now tries to calm the king. My lord, don't think that they killed all the young king's sons. Only Amnon died. David's response to Amnon's death is a father's love torn between his children and their actions. The scriptures say that the king got up, tore off his clothes, and threw himself to the ground. According to the chapter 1, verse 31 of the kingdom, but the cycle of violence and silence wasn't over yet. Absalom ran away to the GDR, where he stayed for 3 years. Meanwhile, as Samuel says in chapter 13, verse 39, King David missed Abish, because he had already consoled him after the death of Amnon. Even in the face of tragedy and fratricide, the father still longed for his son. This sequence of events shows how violence leads to more violence, and how silence can lead to even worse consequences. As it's written in Galatians 6, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. What a person sows, they will reap. One son was exiled, and the royal family was destroyed. But the consequences will keep on happening. To fully understand the impact of this family tragedy, we have to look at the big mistake David made as a dad. The same guy who showed incredible courage against Goliath and great wisdom in leading Israel was failing at crucial moments when his family needed him most. The first major mistake was not being vigilant, like a good leader should be. David should have seen the signs of trouble in Kings 16, when we read that the Lord doesn't look like a man, because a man sees the outside, but the Lord sees the inside. Ironically, David was chosen for his ability to look beyond appearances, but he couldn't see the evil plans of his own wife. Then there was the second mistake: paralysis in the face of crisis. When something bad happened to his friend, David got angry, but didn't do anything. As king, he had all the power needed to fix things. In Proverbs 2 verse 15, it says, "To do justice is the joy of the righteous, but to those who do wrong, it's a curse." David failed as a father and leader when he didn't do what was right. His biggest mistake was allowing his past to get in the way of his present. Some scholars say that he didn't punish Amnon for his sin because he felt guilty about his own actions. In 2 Kings 12, chapter 10 and 11, The prophet Nathan predicted that David's family would suffer from his actions. This wasn't an excuse for David to do nothing, but a warning to be more careful. As the head of his family, David should have been more vigilant. He showed a dangerous tendency to avoid conflict in 1 Kings 3 verse 6. The Bible also tells us about his sons and how their father never contradicted them. This caused a lot of problems in their household. Consequences of David's leadership created a power vacuum that was filled with violence and revenge. In Ecclesiastes, we're warned that the judgment for evil deeds isn't quick, and people are more likely to do bad things in silence. With David's actions, Nona allowed Avisa to take justice into her own hands. Maybe the biggest mistake was not creating an open and safe environment for communication in the family. When Amnon planned revenge, she didn't find refuge with her dad to get justice. There was no dialogue to stop more violence. As they say in Proverbs, a rod and rebuke bring wisdom, but a child left alone is a disgrace. For leaders, especially in families, it's important to have open communication and create a safe environment. Should we protect and guide our children, choosing the path of silence and passivity? The consequences can reflect on generations. What can we learn from this ancient family tragedy, which still resonates so strongly? The lessons are profound and relevant for modern families, regardless of their social status or cultural background. The first important lesson is about the importance of being active observers. As the first verse of Peter's chapter 5 says, we must be sober-minded and vigilant in these days, when our children and young people often face invisible threats through social media and digital connections. Vigilance is even more crucial now, not about obsessive control, but attentive presence and genuine interest in our kids' lives. The warning signs, like sudden changes in behavior, isolation, and strained relationships, have modern equivalents. Inappropriate family relationships and the presence of advisors with questionable influence are the second main takeaway. The second lesson is about taking immediate action when there's violence. David's silence after Tamar was abused shows that inaction is like being complicit. It's like what James said in chapter 4, verse 17. So whoever knows the good and does not do it is a sinner. Today, that means creating open lines of communication in the family, setting clear rules, taking action if there's any hint of violence, and getting professional help. The third lesson is all about breaking the cycle of violence. David's family story went from bad to worse, from an inappropriate desire for sex to violent actions, and then to deadly revenge. In the Bible, we're told that what we sow will come back to us, so for families today, it's important to identify and stop toxic patterns, find peaceful ways to resolve conflicts, forgive without forgetting, and create a safe space for everyone to express their feelings. The fourth lesson is about being active and present with your kids. The Bible says in Proverbs 22 verse 6 that you should guide your child when they're young, so they won't stray from the right path when they grow up. This means being there for them, showing them by example, and not just giving them rules to follow. Active participation in your kids' lives, showing them the value of action over just talking. Regular family time, and being there for them in times of need. We've learned the importance of breaking silence, fear, shame, or the urge to stay hidden. These things can't be stronger than our need to protect those who are vulnerable. As Ephesians 5 verse 11 says, don't participate in darkness, condemn it. For today's families, that means creating a safe space where difficult truths can be shared, building support networks, and seeking help when needed. When it comes to protecting vulnerable people, safety and well-being should always come first, even if it means letting go of visibility. These lessons aren't just suggestions, they're essential for family health. In Tamara's story, we saw what the cost of silence and inaction could be. Its consequences can affect future generations, so we need to turn these lessons into real actions to protect and strengthen our families. Here are some practical and immediate things we can do first. 1. Set regular times for family communication. Don't wait for problems to happen. Create a space where everyone can talk, like we're told in Deuteronomy 6 verse 7, while sitting at home, walking on the street, lying down, etc. 2. Develop a family safety plan. Get to know your kids' friends and social circles. Set clear rules for internet use and social media. Create secure passwords in case of emergency. 3. Seek preventive professional help. Just like we go to the doctor, seeing a family counselor or therapist can help you identify and solve problems before they become a crisis. 4. Update emergency contacts. In case of danger, have a list of trusted people who can help. These are just a few things you can do right away to make a difference. Remember, it's not just about fixing problems, but also about building strong family bonds and communication. Strengthen your family bonds by having regular family dinners and doing activities together. Spend time praying or reflecting as a family, and celebrate your achievements and milestones. Remember that there's no perfect family, but there are strong and prepared ones. As the proverb says, wisdom builds a house, understanding strengthens it, and knowledge fills it with all kinds of precious and delightful things. The rich history of King David and Amnon isn't just a story from the past. It's a mirror reflecting the challenges many families face today. The silence that destroyed their royal family is still a threat to modern families. But unlike David, we don't need to carry our past alone. We don't let our past paralyze us, like Thomas. And unlike Amnon and Assam, we can build a strong foundation for our family. We don't need to let our destructive impulses control the fate of our families. In Isaiah 61 verse 3, the Lord promises to replace our ashes with beauty, our sorrow with joy, and our spirits with clothes of praise. This promise of restoration is open to all families that choose to break the cycle of silence and inaction. We can either be like David, who remains silent in the face of evil, or we can be agents of change and protection in our own families. The price of remaining silent is too great to ignore. It's time to speak up, take action, and protect those we love. Sometimes, breaking silence is the first step towards restoration. Let's make a difference in our world.